Welcome to Deerhound Productions. I'm DaneCat33, and today, I'll be taking a look at the various models and remodels of FNAF characters throughout the series' history. This includes the classic models created by Scott Cawthon, the edits by Steel Studios and Illumix, and the Dead by Daylight models made by Behaviour Interactive. I'll also be looking at the Five Nights at Candy's characters, since they're officially part of the franchise thanks to the Fazbear fanverse. Without further ado, let's get to it. The first game's animatronics are probably what comes to mind when you think Five Nights at Freddy's. And these are arguably the most iconic characters in the series. They've been with the franchise since the first game, and have continued to appear throughout many of the series' installments and merchandise. Scott Cawthon's original models are fur-covered animals, with segmented limbs and visible endoskeleton parts. Especially in the case of Foxy, the very run-down pirate fox, who's not only missing fur in his hand, but also his chest and legs. Random, but he's the only classic animatronic who has upper teeth. A fact that merch companies often forget, considering how much merchandise I've seen giving Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica upper teeth. I also want to note that most of Scott's models utilize the Cloudspec texture. When his models were edited or recreated by other companies, this texture was removed, as it does not look the best. I just want to mention that now, so I don't have to talk about it for every single model. When Steel began developing their FNAF virtual reality game, Help Wanted, Scott sent them his original models, which were then cleaned up and optimized for VR. They also slightly changed the model style. Help Wanted has a very dirty and grungy look to it, and so the models were also given a makeover to reflect the style. The classic animatronics were given a more desaturated look, with their stomach and snout highlights being significantly lighter. Their textures also appear to be more matted and scuffed, unlike their plush, fuzzy suits from the original games. Along with that, Freddy and Bonnie have slightly more vibrant eye colors. I also noticed that Freddy's freckles are bigger, and on both his and Foxy's models, their textures, instead of being extruded from the snout. Freddy's teeth also aren't as black, and they're missing the square indents. Bonnie and Chica are also both missing their paw pads, but Freddy still has his. If you're wondering why this is so specific, it's likely because rabbits and chickens don't have paw pads, but bears do. So Steel Studios probably removed Bonnie and Chica's pads to stay more accurate to their species. They do still have their pads modeled, but they're not textured, unlike Freddy, who clearly has colored pads. Moving on, Chica's toenails appear to be darker, and the inside of her jaw doesn't have a dark red texture. Bonnie's guitar has been modified since it resembled the trademarked Flying V guitar. These models, and every future edit or remodel, removes the clipping endoskeleton rings on the arms and Freddy's clipping endoskeleton hand. Aside from that, these models are essentially the same. Freddy even has the mysterious handprint on his face, which may or may not have been an unintended side effect of the Cloudspec textures. Regardless, it's clearly part of this model. I will add that the models have some differences in the parts and services category, which gives all the animatronics new model additions as part of the repairs, like buttons on their costumes, battery packs, etc. However, those are different models made to suit the gameplay, so I'm less interested in looking at those. Oh, also, no Golden Freddy in this game. Kinda weird, but alright. One less character for me to compare. Next, I want to look at the models that Illumix made for Five Nights at Freddy's AR Special Delivery, the augmented reality mobile game that's sadly no longer playable. In this game, the classic animatronics don't look like their suits are made of fur or fabric at all. They seem to be built out of some sort of plastic. I don't think this is a random change. As in Special Delivery, the animatronics throughout the game are mass-produced replicas for the Fazbear Funtime service, which delivers the animatronics right to your doorstep, so the plastic casings are likely to show that they're cheaply mass-produced. Also, since this is a mobile game, Illumix's textures might look low quality sometimes. No lore there, just phone limits. Anyways, a noticeable change is that the eye texture doesn't feature any twinkles in their eyes. They have glowing, ray-like irises instead. However, Foxy has a glowing pupil. Another change I noticed is that Freddy is missing the wires around his arm, but Bonnie and Foxy still have them. I also noticed that Freddy's highlights are a bit lighter. His and Foxy's freckles are simply textures. The confetti on Chica's bib is also much larger, and Mr. Cupcake's teeth have unique coloring. Along with his pristine teeth, he has a gray and golden tooth. Overall, these models are pretty similar to the original ones, just with slight texture changes and minor model differences. Illumix also made a Golden Freddy model, and again, he looks pretty much the same, except he appears to be made of solid gold. His body is much more vibrant, shiny, and glittery. Along with that, he lacks his glowing pupils and has yellowish teeth. His endoskeleton is also more of a rusty orange color. This model actually stands and moves, with some really nice looking animations. I really like how slumped over he is, and how his shoulders seem to be broken. As part of the Five Nights at Freddy's x Dead by Daylight collaboration, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was added to the game as a map, and the Freddy's trio appears on stage. Since these guys are essentially just map props, they aren't the most detailed or accurate. Their bodies overall are pretty good. Although their torsos and feet look much thinner, their hands look a bit more like gloves, and Bonnie's face is fatter. They're also missing their little endo wire around their arms. I can't put my finger in it, but something is really wrong with Freddy and Chica's faces. Freddy looks like a crackhead, and Chica's face is a bit slimmer. Her beak is also much less flat, while her jaw isn't as thick. Her teeth are also smaller and less rounded. On that note, Freddy's teeth resembles Help Wanted appearance, rather than the original Freddy. Just like in that game, Bonnie's guitar was changed. Again, likely due to legal concerns. Like the special delivery models, these also lack any textured sparkle or highlights in their eyes. They definitely have an otherworldly, almost bootleg look to them, but they're honestly not too bad. I like the minor detail of them having seams on their suits, which makes them feel a bit more realistic, but I take issue with the lack of Foxy. Pirate's Cove on the Freddy's map is used as a looping area, so he doesn't appear there, and he's nowhere else on the map. Weird. Golden Freddy also doesn't appear, but that's not a big surprise. Now this is a very tough choice to decide the winner. Who am I kidding? Scott's original models absolutely solo every other company's. Now it's not to say I hate the newer guys. I do kind of dig the scuffed look of the Help Wanted models, and the dirty, scratched plastic material of the special delivery gang. But nothing can come close to these perfect, iconic models. They're such good designs, and none of the later edits or remodels have done anything better than these. Before we move on to Five Nights at Freddy's 2, I want to take a look at the animatronic endoskeleton, Endo-01. This guy is what lies under the animatronic plush suits, and you can see him in the backstage. In Help Wanted, Endo-01 has some minor changes. They appear to be a bit darker, but they still remain shiny. Their head is surrounded by a clutter of wires, and similar to Withered Bonnie, they have glowing red dots behind the animatronic eyes. Speaking of the Withereds, their feet with 3 toes are used for Endo-01. Their fingers also look more like Springtrap's Endo fingers. This is really weird since when we see Foxy in Help Wanted, he has accurate hands and feet. So I'm not really sure what's going on here. Endo-01 also appeared in Steel's newest entry, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. Spoiler alert, but Murray's costume manor is revealed to have been working on Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, so you can find the remains of their work scattered throughout the building, including parts of Endo-01 here and there. We never get a full look at their model, but unlike Edwin, we can easily put the pieces together. They're a very light gray color with no shine, and they're missing some details such as the bolts on the lower part of their face, and the black lines and rectangles on their limbs. The MCM Endo-01 hands are much more accurate than Help Wanted, although their fingers are missing the rectangle indents. Their feet are similarly accurate, with a slightly more detailed joint, and wires connecting the base of their foot to each toe. This might just be a design change, but their foot appears to be missing the top part. It's much thinner, and you can see where the toes connect to the base. The most noticeable change with this model is that the animatronic eyes are solid gray with a dark gray pupil. Their face is also quite dirty. Overall, this isn't a very detailed model, but I guess it is just a prop. There is a more detailed endoskeleton, which was used for the prototype animatronic models, and as props, most notably in the secret basement room. Similar to the previous endoskeleton, this one is missing most of its details, but it still has a shiny, metallic look, and some bolts. Speaking of missing parts, their endoskeleton doesn't have fingers or a head. Their body is covered in a mess of wires, and the wires on their feet are colored. Throughout their body, there's also crash test dummy and caution symbols. This model looks better than the other MCM Endo, but it's incomplete, and more so a prop rather than a full animatronic, ensuring that it doesn't get ahead of the other models. Endo-01 appeared in special delivery as an enemy, which is a big upgrade for this guy. It took like 5 years for them to actually be able to kill you. Illumix's Endo looks pretty much the same as Scott's model, and the black parts throughout the endoskeleton are more of a dark gray. The eye texture changes we discussed with the classics also apply to this Endo. In Dead by Daylight, an endoskeleton appears in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza along with Springtrap's Mori, and Behaviour Interactive took a lot of creative liberties. First off, this endoskeleton is covered in saw blades that are used to eliminate the survivors. But by harnessing the blender powers of my awesome girlfriend, we can remove those torture devices to reveal a strange looking endoskeleton. We can also take a look at the endoskeleton that pops out of the Freddy's vent. This guy's a very thick square head with metal eyebrows to form a scowl. They have glowing red eyes with large white pupils. There's also what appears to be ear joints and screws sticking out the side of their head. Moving down a bit, their jaw looks very bulky and square. It also noticeably doesn't have any endoskeleton teeth, which I really like. I don't really think the robotic framework of an animatronic should have teeth. The upper parts of their limbs are encased in a thin frame, and the lower parts are wrapped in rings. Behaviour ditched the not very realistic ball joints in favor of hinge-like joints. The Endo hands are also very different. It still has 4 fingers, but those end in sharp claws, similar to the Burntrap and Ruined Mimic hands. Speaking of that awesome guy, the finger joints resemble the Secret of the Mimic M2 hands. Their feet also looks like one of the Ruined Mimic's feet, and similarly, it has a bulky chest and thin spine, with some pistons attached like Burntrap. I'm sure this is all a coincidence, but I do think it's really funny to look at the similarities to M2. Anyways, if you couldn't tell, this endoskeleton is a vastly different design to Scott Cawthon's model, and I can't tell if I love or hate it. For this endoskeleton, I think the best version of him is the special delivery model made by Illumix. The Scott model is pretty good, and I think Steel Wool's also looks great, especially with the addition of wires on its head, but the weird fingers bother me, especially since they got those right on Foxy. The Dead by Daylight Endo strays too far from the original design and looks weird, but Illumix's model is simply Scott's design with enhanced textures. Moving on from the first game's cast, let's take a look at the shiny toy animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's 2. We made a video discussing their evolution throughout the series, so if you're interested in learning more about their history across the games and books, then check it out. But for now, let's focus on their looks. These characters are super cute, friendly versions of the original Freddy's animatronics. They have lighter colors, eyelashes, rosy cheeks, and upper teeth. These bots also have much slimmer bodies, except for Toy Freddy. Toy Foxy also has a very unique body. After being torn apart by kids and transformed into a mess of parts, he became known as the Mangle. Unlike Foxy's red coloring, Mangle is white and pink with lipstick. A new addition to the group is Balloon Boy, who appears to be a small child holding a balloon and a sign advertising said balloons. When Steel Wool reworked this group for Help Wanted, they made numerous changes. First off, like the classics, the toys are much more scraped up, with a lot of scratches and chips, which, honestly, I think defeats the point of them being shiny new versions of the Freddy's band. Toy Freddy is a much darker brown than his original appearance, and his buttons are flattened, simply reduced to textures on his chest, likely to optimize his model for VR. He's also, for some reason, missing his top teeth, and his microphone has a ring around it now, rather than just being a sphere. The handle is also black instead of gray. Toy Bonnie is much more accurate to his original appearance, but his iris and pupil are shrunken. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, they were unusually large, but when he appeared in your office, they would shrink. However, in Help Wanted, they're always shrunken. The biggest issue I have with him is that his upper teeth are, for some reason, spaced, which makes him look really weird. On the other hand, Toy Chica looks pretty good, even if her bib is a bit scraped up. The only change I noticed is that in the original game, there were 2 models for her head, one with her beak and another where it was removed, and she had a sort of smile that you can clearly see isn't there when the beak is on. However, in Help Wanted, she only has 1 head model. You can actually see the corners of her smile stretching past her beak, and her scary face has pink eyelids instead of the metallic gray ones from Five Nights at Freddy's 2. With Mangle, it's easy to notice that the Steel Wool model is covered in rust, and her jaw's a bit low poly, again, likely for VR optimization. His endoskeleton head also has a pink eyelid, rather than the gray one seen on Scott's model. Balloon Boy looks mostly the same too, but his skin is darker and he has pink eyelids. In Special Delivery, Illumix's models are much more accurate to the original designs. Similar to Help Wanted, Toy Freddy is darker. He's also darker in the FNAF 2 movie, so I'm wondering if his darker coloring throughout the later installments was a suggestion by Scott himself, since it's a very consistent trend. Anyways, his microphone is textured like a real mic, and similar to every other AR model, his textures are a bit dirtier. Speaking of which, his freckles are simply textures rather than being modeled, which goes for Toy Bonnie too. His irises are also less detailed, lacking any highlights, and instead, just being a blue glowing ring. Toy Bonnie's the opposite. He still has his highlights, along with the addition of some glowing rays. However, he's missing the dark part of his iris. His iris also never shrinks as far as I can tell. Much like this rabbit, Toy Chica's eyes are similar to her original model, just with the addition of rays, and again, no dark spot. Other than that, her model's pretty much the same. Her bib texture is a little different, but that's the only difference I could spot. Mangle and BB also look pretty much the same as Scott's original models, just with different textures. Unlike the other AR models and even her original appearance, Mangle is missing any rays in his eyes, though she still has her sparkles. Now, let's decide the winner. No hate to Steel Wool Studios, but their models are definitely not it. I'm not a fan of the scratched up look they have, and all the changes just make them look worse. Scott's models are great, but honestly, I think I'll have to give the win to Illumix's edits. These are essentially just the same models, but with much better textures. I'm not a fan of how the Cloudspecman textures look on the original models. Illumix's textures are much better. I think this is how all edits or remodels should be. Just the same overall look, but with minor improvements. The other main group of animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 are the Withereds, run-down versions of the Freddy's gang with missing parts and exposed wires. These bots look very different from the first game's cast. Even ignoring their damaged state, their bodies are much bulkier, and these animatronics all feature upper teeth. Well, I guess Bonnie doesn't. He and Freddy also have buttons on their stomachs. Even with all these changes, they're still some of the most iconic designs from the series, especially with Bonnie's missing face and Chica's unhinged jaw. These characters were initially absent from Help Wanted. In the FNAF 2 levels, Foxy just used the FNAF 1 model, and the rest of the Withereds never appeared. But on September 14th, 2019, there was a bonus Withered animatronic level added to the game, and Withered Foxy replaced Classic Foxy in the rest of the FNAF 2 levels. While Steel's FNAF 1 edits were lighter, their Withered animatronic models are darker. Withered Freddy also has paw pads, even though he didn't in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. The only other changes I could really see were with Withered Chica. Notably, her eye textures are bigger, with more spaced out twinkles, and her endoskeleton head is now visible through the eye sockets. I didn't notice this for a long time, but she actually has endoskeleton hands. However, they lack any fingers. You can see that Chica's wires are less colorful as well. Her body's a bit dirtier, while her bib is cleaner, and she has blood in her endoskeleton head. This seems to be based on a specific render of Chica, where the red lighting makes it look like she has blood in her endo. Similar to the Illumix toy models, I'd say these are the ideal outcome for model edits. They're optimized to work better, but overall, they still look pretty much the same, ensuring that the original vision for these animatronics is preserved. Unlike most of the categories in this video, I honestly don't have a strong preference towards either of these model groups. Both Scott and Steelwool did a great job bringing the Withered animatronics to life, but I'll be handing the win to Scott Cawthon's original models. Again, great job to Steelwool for recreating these iconic characters, but there's nothing that these do better than the original models. However, I might just be biased as a longtime FNAF fan. Next up is the Marionette, who, after the new movie, has honestly become one of my favorite characters in the series. As I explained in our Toy-matronic history video, which you should totally watch, the Marionette isn't actually a Toy-matronic, so she'll be getting her own section. The Marionette, also known as the puppet by fans, is, well, a marionette. She has a lengthy, dark body, and her limbs are covered in white stripes. She wears a similarly white mask, decorated with red cheeks, lipstick, and purple tear streaks. Like pretty much every other Help Wanted model, the Steelwool Marionette is a lot more worn down than her original appearance. She's faintly covered in what appears to be dirt or rust, along with black smudges on her stripes. Her mask is also very scratched and chipped. This might be controversial, but I'm going to give the win to Steelwool's model. I'm not the biggest fan of the worn down look this design has, but this model is enhanced with better bones, allowing it to do a lot of cool floaty poses and animations, rather than how the original Marionette kinda just stood there. Seeing this puppet rise from the music box and walk down the hall is incredible. Again, while I think her appearance isn't as good as the original version, the model's wavy body is awesome. A character who also appears at the prize counter is Endo 02. Much like the previous endoskeleton, this thing is what lurks beneath the toy and Withered animatronics. Similar to FNAF 1, this bear endoskeleton also appears in the main gameplay, but this one serves as an Easter egg rather than a prop. In Help Wanted, Endo 02 can show up during the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 levels and the Mangle Vent repair. He noticeably has less wires, probably to help with the game's performance. His eye texture is enlarged, and his pupils bigger, and his twinkles are missing. Outside of that, I don't really see any other changes, but that might just be since we only have 3 images of Scott Cawthon's model. These models are essentially the same, so I'll give the win to Scott Cawthon, mostly because of nostalgia. His renders of Endo 02 have such a creepy look that has always stuck with me. The final Five Nights at Freddy's 2 character I'll discuss is RWQFSFASXC, also known as Shadow Bonnie. The mysterious character was first introduced as an Easter egg that could rarely appear in your office, before getting an expanded role in the third installment's minigames and special delivery. This rabbit appears to be an entirely black version of Toy Bonnie with no texture. They also have 4 upper teeth instead of his regular 2. All of their teeth are glowing, along with their big ol' eyes. In Five Nights at Freddy's 3, their minifigure lacks these glowing textures and actually has some shine on their model. In Special Delivery, Shadow Bonnie looks pretty much the same, but their glow is much brighter and appears to be bluish. However, that's only because of the filter enabled when they're fighting you. I think I'll give the win here to Illumix. Their model is essentially the same as Scott's, but I like the glow on Shadow Bonnie's teeth and eyes. It looks really nice. Moving on to Five Nights at Freddy's 3, let's start with Springtrap, the rotted Spring Bonnie suit with Afton's corpse decaying within. Springtrap is such an iconic FNAF character, and a very well designed one at that. This makes it extra painful to see how he turned down Help Wanted. I love this game and I love Steelwool Studios, but they really massacred Springtrap. He's missing most of his corpse and wires, making him look bare bones wherever his suit is broken off, most notably his lower legs and feet. Granted, this was likely done for the sake of VR optimization, so I can overlook that. Like pretty much every other help wanted character, he's lighter than his original model, he doesn't look as furry, and he's missing the vein-like textures on his costume. His lower legs are also the same color as the rest of his suit. The remains beneath his costume are more of a purplish gray color, rather than the fleshy red seen on his original model. Some people have interpreted this as being done to show that he's the Purple Man, but personally, I think it's part of the game's dirty, realistic look. His iris is also much larger with a brighter shine, and he's missing his glowing pupil. Aside from his textures, his hips are, for some reason, really thick. I don't hate this model as much as most people do, but man, does it have a lot of unnecessary changes that only make Springtrap look worse. On the other hand, Illumix's Springtrap model in special delivery is very accurate. The only differences I can notice is that he's shinier, his suit textures are much more rougher and bumpy, instead of the veiny, fabric texture from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, and his corpse is connected to the suit's jaw, stretching Afton's mouth out whenever the suit moves its jaw. The corpse textures are also much more fleshy than the original dried up raisin looking body. This is a very solid Springtrap model overall. It keeps what made the design so iconic and adds some minor visual enhancements. The most recent Springtrap model is the one seen in the Five Nights at Freddy's Dead by Daylight chapter. Unlike the other Springtraps, which were edited versions of Scott's original model, this rabbit appears to have been remade from the ground up. But just like all of those later Springtrap variants, his body is much more buffy. But just like all of those later Springtrap variants, his body is much more bumpy and less plush-like, which honestly really works for this model. I love the dirty textures. His withering is also vastly different, most notably, his lower legs have a bit more of the suit on, and his chest is more intact. Speaking of which, he's missing his stomach and button, which makes his torso look a bit odd. On a more positive note, the spaghetti Afton corpse we're familiar with has been replaced with one that actually resembles the remains of a human being. The suit itself also makes a bit more sense. I have always been confused about how a human was meant to fit into this thing. But the Dead by Daylight model has a wider, hollowed out endoskeleton, and replaces some of the endoskeleton joints with hinges, allowing a person to fit their limbs into the costume. The feet also seem to have a spot for someone to slide their foot into. It makes much more sense as to how someone would wear this. Speaking of the corpse within Springtrap, Afton's eyes are attached to the mask rather than his body. You can actually see that his eyes don't move when his head does during his jump scare. Springtrap's eyes are also half circles. So after taking a look at all these moldy rabbit models, I definitely think the winner is Dead by Daylight Springtrap. The model isn't as iconic as the original, but it is so well made and surprisingly realistic. Even though he's missing his buttons and stomach, that doesn't detract from how stunning this model and design are. The practicality and detailed corpse make this model so much better. Next up are everyone's favorite rabbit-induced hallucinations, the Phantoms. These guys are pretty much just retextured versions of the Withereds and toys, except for Funtime Chica. Most of these ghouls are covered in a gross screen-burnt texture that fits really well with the whole vibe of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, and it helps set them apart from the original models they're based on. They aren't the best set of bad guys, but their look really helps them fulfill their role. Now, onto Steelwool's famous Phantoms. Do I have to say anything? In all seriousness, I do like how Steelwool made parts of them transparent, but they just do not look good in my opinion. Mostly because they're way too green, and instead of using the withered animatronics, they're based on the classics, which just don't fit. In their defense, I think this is because Steelwool didn't have the withered models done by time of release. However, this does not excuse the lack of Funtime Chica. She just does not exist in Help Wanted at all. The same goes for the Phantom Puppet, which really sucks since she was probably my favorite Phantom. Other notable changes are that BB has giant eyes, him and Foxy are also missing their legs, and Funtime Freddy's brown instead of green. So with all that being said, you can probably guess which set of Phantoms is the winner. The original models take the moldy green cake for this round. As I said before, Steelwool's ghostly look for the Phantoms is pretty cool, but they used the wrong models and left out multiple Phantoms. So Scott's original models definitely win this round. Going from the most sauceless group of animatronics to one of the coolest, the Nightmares. These scary guys are monstrous versions of the Freddy's gang, all torn up and armed with razor-sharp teeth and claws. The Nightmare animatronics we'll be discussing here are Nightmare Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Fredbear, Balloon Boy, and the Theory Bait King, Nightmarionne. Nightmare Mangle and Nightmare don't appear past UCN, and the Jacko animatronics and Plushtrap will be in separate categories for reasons that I'll discuss later. Steelwool featured these nightmarish characters in Help Wanted and its DLC, Curse of Dreadbear. Overall, the Nightmares are missing a lot of their wires and whiskers, probably to optimize their models for VR. Starting with Nightmare Freddy, he looks the same, with fewer wires. His eyes have a yellowish color, and they're much brighter, with no twinkles, which goes for all the Nightmares in this game. Speaking of which, Nightmare Bonnie's eyes are yellow rather than purple. His fur is a much darker color of blue, and his highlights are a bit more pinkish. His right hand has more of its suit on compared to the original model, and his left thumb has some of the shell broken off. This missing suit on the thumb actually applies to all 4 classic Nightmares, and I assume this was changed to avoid clipping. Moving on, Nightmare Chica's eyes are pretty accurate to her initial appearance, but she's missing her 3rd row of teeth from FNAF 4. However, this was also excluded from Ultimate Custom Night, so I assume this edit uses the version of Nightmare Chica from that game. Her body also appears to be darker, and her withering is a tad different, most notably on her upper legs. Nightmare Cupcake has also been split into 2 pieces, his jaw and head, which float disconnected. He also doesn't have a plate to rest on, he's less withered, his eye is missing twinkles, and his candle's glowing. Nightmare Foxy looks almost exactly like Scott Cawthon's original model. His fur is slightly darker, but I think that's it. Nightmare Fredbear looks pretty much the same too. There are only some minor differences. Of course, since this is Help Wanted, his colors are desaturated. His endoskeleton, claws, and teeth are also less shiny. He doesn't have the metal rods jutting out of his eyes, which are a solid orange glow rather than being red and white with a black pupil. The bear's accessories are magenta colored, and they have less of a velvety texture. Fredbear's right foot is missing some toes for whatever reason, and the dark parts on the bottom of his feet are much more faint. A very strange change is that his lower button is white, which, similar to Withered Chica having blood on her, seems to be a mistake stemming from lighting. In the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 Extras menu, Scott's lighting makes the bottom button super shiny, almost white. In-game, you can clearly see it's black, but it looks like Steelable used the Extras menu render as a reference for colors, and they thought the bottom button was white. I believe a similar thing happened with his teeth, which are much more white in Help Wanted instead of metallic. Next up is Nightmare Baby, who has quite a few differences. His eyelids and buttons are black rather than dark purple. And speaking of which, the purple stripes on his chest and hat are wider. And the hat stripes cut off after the brim instead of continuing as they do on the original model. That's better than his arms, as those are missing stripes entirely. His eyes are also slightly different. His pupil is black instead of white, and his right eye's twinkles are flipped. Something else I noticed is that his 2nd row of teeth is attached to a tinier jaw. The inside of his mouth is also black instead of blue, and he's missing the jaw supports that would sometimes appear in Five Nights at Freddy's 4. The bottom of his shoes are the same color as the top, instead of how they were darker on Scott's model. And like most Help Wanted characters, he's all dirty and scratched up, instead of his original clean and shiny appearance. Nightmare Yon is a similar case. He's covered in either dirt or rust. His shoulders aren't as crooked, and his tear streaks are much thinner. Another detail I noticed is that his face paint is cracked. Nightmare Yon's eyes appear to be less veiny, and they're missing the black ring around them with twinkles. Much like the Marionette in Help Wanted, he's very wavy, especially with his lengthy fingers. He loves wiggling those. Oh right, almost forgot the Freddles. Honestly, I don't see many differences with these guys. Their textures of course look less plush-like, and they're a bit lighter. Their feet are much thicker and low poly. Their razor-sharp teeth are white instead of metallic and look a bit thinner. Similar to the Withered animatronics, I don't have a very strong opinion when it comes to these. However, I think Scott wins, somewhat because of nostalgia, but also because the Help Wanted models have a couple of issues. None of which are major, but these errors do weigh down Steelable's models. They are still amazing models, but I don't think they surpass the originals. I had to leave out the best Nightmare animatronic, Plushtrap, since unlike the other Nightmares, Illumix made a model of him. So this little guy gets his own category. This tiny green rabbit is a nightmarish plush version of Spring Bonnie. He's not as run down as the other Nightmares, and he lacks any claws, but he's still some sharp teeth to nom on people. Like the classic animatronics, his Steelable model appears to be much more solid compared to his initial plush-like appearance. He also has some remarkably low poly toes. Feet aside, his coloring is a bit more yellow, and he's missing the green bit at the start of his teeth, which I assume are meant to be gums. The most significant change with this design is the hands. Unlike his plushy paws from FNAF 4, they look much more animatronic-like. And he has an extra finger, possibly as a callback to Spring Bonnie, who similarly has 5 fingers. The model made by Illumix for special delivery is much more accurate to his initial appearance. He has the correct colors, number of fingers, and the green gums are back. However, his eyes have gray irises instead of a solid black pupil. His design is much more detailed. His suit is made up of a stitched-together patchwork, which is an awesome take on the character. For this unique take and the model's overall accuracy, this one definitely takes the cake for the best Plushtrap model. As any good edit does, it keeps the design accurate while enhancing it. Again, I'm in love with the patchwork Plushtrap look. Very solid work from Illumix. The final set of FNAF 4 characters I'll be covering are the Jacko animatronics, specifically Bonnie and Chica, as those are the only ones with multiple models. These Halloween Bonnie and Chica animatronics resemble jack-o'-lanterns, with their eyes missing and their insides glowing. The Nightmare Cupcake has also been replaced with a giant jack-o'-lantern. In Help Wanted's Curse of Dreadbear DLC, the Jackos use Nightmare Bonnie and Chica's models, so most of the changes we discussed for them, such as the lack of wires and whiskers, carry over to these guys. However, unlike the original models, the insides of their suits and parts of their endoskeletons feature illuminated textures to give them their Jacko glow, rather than simply having lights in their models. Speaking of which, their glow is more yellow instead of orange. Anyways, the jack-o'-lantern doesn't have any glowing eyes. It's also orange instead of green and more scratched up. After all, this is Help Wanted. In Five Nights at Freddy's 4, Bonnie had some bluish-green parts in his left hand, which have been removed in this game. I've always assumed that the blue coloring was a leftover from Nightmare Bonnie, but I'm not quite sure. In Special Delivery, the Jackos are more of a dark orange color. In Scott's games and Help Wanted, they were a dirty yellow. But here, they're full on pumpkin orange. Similar to Help Wanted, they have much more illumination inside their bodies. Jacko Bonnie once again has his weird blue fingers fixed. Overall, their suits are a bit smoother and shinier, and they kind of look like they're one big carved pumpkin. Compare the texture of Chica's jack-o'-lantern to their bodies, it's pretty similar. Their glow is also much darker than the previous models. Now to decide the winner, and it definitely isn't Scott. Jacko Bonnie's blue hand bits are really weird, and the lantern illumination is done much better on the Steelwool and Illumix models. That being said, I think Illumix's models beat out Steelwool's. They're very similar, but I prefer the Illumix textures and glow. They're much more orange, and I think that fits the Jacko animatronics much better than the dirty yellow look that other models have. This is definitely one of those categories where I don't think any of the models are bad. Everyone did a great job with these, but Illumix definitely wins. Moving on from the Nightmares and Jackos, let's take a look at the clown-like animatronics from Sister Location. Also, just a heads up, this category is going to be very messy. Steelwool has made multiple Funtime models, but on the other hand, Illumix didn't get through the whole cast. We will therefore assign each character its own category, which we'll do for pretty much every game onward. The first animatronic I'll be looking at is Circus Baby. As the name suggests, this animatronic looks like a giant clown child with pigtails. Like every model in Sister Location, she looks great, even if you can hardly see her. On the other hand, Circus Baby's model in Help Wanted is okay, I guess? Similar to the toys, I think she has too many scratches and paint chips. Her colors are also very desaturated, and her hair is a little too orange. Scott's original model does feature her with orange hair, but it's much more noticeable in Help Wanted. She's also missing the painted rings around her eyes. However, Steelwool really redeemed themselves with her appearance in Help Wanted 2. Baby has a bluish tint, and the gray plates across her body look purplish. Her red coloring is a bit darker, save for her hair, which is more accurate to the coloring of Scott's original model. Baby's purple highlights around her eyes are also much more noticeable than they were in the previous games. Those, along with her eyelashes, eyebrows, and hairbands, are a slightly darker purple. Like most Steelwool VR models, her body is covered in scrapes and scratches, but it's much more subtle than the original Help Wanted. The biggest change with her model is that her stomach hatch opens up. See, William Afton designed Circus Baby to abduct children by dragging them inside of her chest cavity. Scott's original model doesn't factor this in, but in the end of her Help Wanted 2 office level, Baby's chest cavity opens up, rewarding the player with ice cream. In Special Delivery, Circus Baby looks pretty accurate. However, her eyes are styled like the other AR models. She's also much shinier, and has some minor damage and dirt. The winner for this category is tough to decide, since, except for the Help Wanted Circus Baby, these are all very good models. But the win will definitely have to go to Help Wanted 2. I love the bluish purple look this version has, and the darker red is really nice. The minor scratches across her body are also a neat addition to add some realistic wear, without compromising Circus Baby's sleek design. And similar to her father's Dead by Daylight model, I love how practical she is in Help Wanted 2. The chest cavity actually working in this game is a fantastic addition. Usually, I'm not the fondest of Steelwool's edits, but they did an amazing job keeping the same vibe with Baby, while giving her some minor texture and model enhancements. Let's move on to Funtime Freddy, the pink and white version of good old Fazbear. Attached to his arm is Bonbon, a little Bonnie hand puppet with a mind of its own. In Help Wanted, Funtime Freddy's model is pretty much the same, just a little bit more low poly. His textures, however, are different. His pink coloring is a bit more dull, and like pretty much every model in this game, he's much more scratched up. His paw pad is also not colored. I assume someone just forgot to texture that. His eyes are a much brighter blue, and the dark shade on the bottom of his iris is wider. Both of these apply to Bonbon, whose teeth aren't round for some reason. Freddy's second layer of faceplates is white, and his second snout plates don't open during his jump scare. His endoskeleton metal is also much thicker and lacks the segmented lines. In Help Wanted 2, Funtime Freddy looks much better. I mean, not only is he higher poly, but his body is much shinier, even if it is covered in dirt and grime. It's much more accurate than the scratched up, dull look from the first Help Wanted. His paw also got colored pink this time around. His and Bonbon's eyes are still brighter, but they lack the twinkle in their pupils, and neither of them has the dark part of their iris. Bonbon is much smaller, like awkwardly small. I also noticed that his teeth still aren't rounded. Funtime Freddy's endoskeleton metal is still much thicker, but he now has segmented lines. His secondary faceplates are now silver, and the snout plates don't open during the jump scare. Oddly enough, Freddy is missing the pink rings around his eyes, which is really weird considering they were present in Help Wanted. Like this model, Illumix's Funtime Freddy is also very accurate, but has some minor changes. His colors are all much brighter, including Bonbon's purple eyes. Speaking of which, their eyes lack any twinkle or shine, and instead follow the trend of Special Delivery's ray irises. All of his metal textures are also much shinier. Like the other AR models, he has some dirt and filth covering him. The weirdest part about this model is that it's a straight up cartoon. Bonbon has some crazy squash and stretch animations that have him flying around Funtime Freddy's body like he's a Joy Drew Studios character. I love this style and the animation looks great, but I'm not sure how well it fits a giant metal robot. Still, props to Illumix for at least doing something different. Similar to Circus Baby, it's pretty tough to decide the winner. I'd even argue that Help Wanted's model is pretty good, but it's not getting the win. No, that'll be going to Scott's model. Yeah, that might seem underwhelming after I explained all these other models, but none of them live up to the original. I might just be biased since Funtime Freddy was my favorite character for a while, but I think these models all have issues that hold them back. Help Wanted is way too scratched up, Special Delivery is too cartoony and bright, and Help Wanted 2 is a microscopic bonbon and no eye rings. Again, I like these models, but none of them do anything better than the original. Although I will say that Illumix's model is probably on par, but Scott definitely made the best Funtime Freddy model. Next up is the Funtime version of Foxy, who isn't a pirate. Instead, he resembles Mangle. Like Freddy, she's primarily pink and white. In Help Wanted, Funtime Foxy is fairly accurate, but of course, he's gotta be all worn down and desaturated because of dirty realism. There are some other changes too. The most noticeable to me is that the ring around her speaker is white, which, similar to Withered Chica's blood and Nightmare Fredbear's buttons, seems to be a mistake based on lighting. In the Sister Location Extras menu, the bright lighting on Foxy makes his speaker ring look white, but in-game, it's clearly silver. The ring is also much thicker, unlike the pink highlights around her eyes, which have been slimmed down. His purple freckles are also now black. In Help Wanted 2, Steel improved upon their first Funtime Foxy edit, making him brighter and shinier, but she's still fairly dirty. His freckles and speaker ring are still the wrong colors, and now his bow tie is darker. The insides of Foxy's ears, his eyebrows, lipstick, and cheeks look closer to purple rather than pink. This might have been changed to match with Funtime Freddy's coloring. Speaking of which, similar to Freddy, Foxy's missing the pink rings around his eyes. Another issue I noticed is that her faceplate lines are warped. Overall, she's pretty much the same as Steelwoolf's first edit, just with better textures. Funtime Foxy looks great in Help Wanted 2, but I don't think it's better than Scott's model due to the purplish coloring and dirt on his body. This isn't a bad model by any means, and it's a huge improvement from the first Help Wanted, but I don't think it surpasses the original. Up next is Ennard, the amalgamation of all the Funtime animatronics endoskeletons. This spaghetti robot has the eyes of all the Funtimes plastered throughout its body, a red button on its chest, and a clown mask topped with a hat. Ennard is also sometimes missing one of his eyebrows. In Help Wanted, their mask is rougher and dirtier. Along with that, it's always missing an eyebrow. The clown's hat stripes curve more upward, and there are only 2 stripes instead of 3. All of the eyeballs on their body are blue, instead of featuring a variety of colors. His body is overall much darker and less shiny. Other than that, Ennard looks mostly the same. He has fewer wires, but for being optimized for VR, they still have a surprising amount of detail. In Help Wanted 2, they have fewer wires sticking out, and the ones throughout their body are typically more clumped together as a solid mass. Their thighs are also thinner, and some of the wires surrounding them are missing their horizontal lines and metallic texturing. Ennard's lower right leg is full of wires instead of being hollow, and their toes are missing wires. A cool detail with this model is that it has a wire running through the red button. It's a small thing, but I think it's neat. Ennard's eyes throughout their body are orange, rather than being blue like in Help Wanted, or multicolored like his original appearance. I wonder if this was a mistake, or supposed to be some sort of connection to the Mimic. Speaking of which, Ennard's right eye isn't as covered in his poses throughout the game, and their mask is still missing an eyebrow like in the first Help Wanted. But the white paint is much shinier than the first Steel Wool model. Their hat has the correct curve and amount of stripes, but their positioning is different. The bottom and top stripes are more cut off, and the middle one is thicker. Deciding the winner for the best Ennard model is a bit difficult, but strangely enough, I prefer the Help Wanted model the most. I'm honestly very disappointed by Ennard's appearance in the second VR installment. Compared to the first game, they're much less detailed. I miss all of the wires jutting out of this messy character. The clumped together look they have just does not cut it. Scott's Ennard is better than the Help Wanted 2 model, but it almost always looks way too shiny and white, while the Help Wanted model's darker look works much better. Sure, the mask is a bit scuffed, and the eyeballs are all the wrong colors, but honestly, I never really noticed that in game. I like this model a lot, although that's not to say I hate the Scott model or the Help Wanted 2 model. I just think Help Wanted Ennard is the best. I'm very impressed by how detailed he is for a VR game. Moving on from the big ol' animatronics, let's take a look at the smaller guys, starting with the Bidybabs. These are tiny, childlike animatronics who are paired with Circus Baby. They appear as threats during Night 2 and the Custom Night. A Bidybab can appear in Help Wanted as an Easter egg, and its appearance looks mostly the same. Overall, she's a bit low poly, and her button is textured instead of modeled. Outside of that, her jaw isn't as wide, and her eyes look like they're bulging out of her head. I know they're big in the Scott games, but here, they look like they're about to pop out. In Help Wanted 2, she still has bulging eyes, but unlike the original model, she has lower eyelids connected by a metal circle. However, just like in Help Wanted, she has a slimmer jaw and a button texture. Like the other Funtimes in this game, she's covered in a bit of dirt and grime. Other than those details, Bidybab looks pretty much the same. The winner for this category will be Steel Wool's model for them in Help Wanted 2. It's kinda just the same as Scott's model, but with better textures. I really like this game's subtle dirt and damage. The next tiny terror is the Mini-Renas. These little dolls dance alongside Ballora and have traumatized many players during Sister Location's infamous 4th night. Similar to Bidybab, a Mini-Rena can appear in Help Wanted as an Easter egg. This model has a wooden texture, which I thought was a design change, but apparently these guys were always supposed to look like wooden mannequins. Their textures in Scott games look way more like a plushy material. Back to the Steel Wool model, they don't have their glowing eyes, and they're slightly lower poly. These dolls returned in Help Wanted 2 as an antagonist throughout the Sister Location levels. My favorite part is how you can just grab them and throw them around. This up-close appearance lets us see that their white tutu has been colored pink, and their wooden textures are much more detailed. They have some slightly scratched up, dirty textures too. Most importantly, the Mini-Renas now have their glowing eyes, which aren't as bright and are missing their glowing white highlights. Their special delivery model looks pretty similar, but while their textures remain dirty, they don't look as wooden. Like Scott's models, their skirt is still white, and they keep their yellow eyes, however they're not glowing and have rays like the other special delivery models. Their eyes are also more gray instead of black, making their eyeballs much more visible. The winning model is absolutely the Help Wanted 2 Mini-Renas. Scott's texture does not look very wooden, and the Help Wanted model is okay, I guess? The special delivery Mini-Renas look great, but I don't like how visible their gray eyeballs are, and how their irises don't glow. I prefer how in Sister Location, you can only make out their glowing eyes. They also have some great dirty textures, but they lack the wooden look. The Help Wanted 2 models, however, have an amazing wooden texture with some slight damage. And I like their glowing eyes, even if I wish they were a bit brighter. But anyways, overall, the Help Wanted 2 models look great. The detail really comes through when you see the dolls up close in VR. Now we can get into the really weird Sister Location characters, starting with Endo. This yellow-eyed endoskeleton first appeared in Sister Location Night 3. When you travel through Funtime Auditorium, you'll have to use your flash beacon to make sure you don't run into Funtime Foxy. But when doing so, you might catch a glimpse of Endo standing in the darkness. He later returned in the game's Custom Night, where he essentially had the same mechanics as Golden Freddy. He'd sometimes appear in your office, and if you don't raise your monitor, then you're in for a jump scare. Endo surprisingly returned in Help Wanted 2. Instead of appearing during a Custom Night recreation, he replaced Funtime Freddy in the hard mode version of the Breaker Room. Like Freddy, he's missing any twinkle in his eyes. His soul has been zapped out by VR optimization, which has left his body as one solid clump of wires, instead of how, in his original model, you could see through his thin wire frame. His arm frames are also much thicker to make him less see-through. Endo's ears are missing the hole in the center, and his body is one dark gray color, rather than shades of gray and black. The wires inside of his mouth are also much more aligned, rather than their messy look and sister location. While I like Endo in Help Wanted 2, I think his first model looks better. The steelable model is too solid. I prefer you can see through parts of him on the original model. Granted, this was likely changed to help with the game's performance, but still, the original Endo is much better. Let's take a look at another odd threat, that being Lolbit. This character first appeared as a shopkeeper in FNAF World, before serving as an Easter egg in Sister Location, and a selectable enemy in the custom night. They'll appear on your monitors, and if you don't type LOL in time, they'll cause a visual and audio distraction, appearing as a disembodied head. Their model is an altered Funtime Foxy, with their FNAF World coloring, no eyebrows, and white glowing eyes. In Help Wanted, Steelwool Studios gave Lolbit a full body, which again is just a recolored Funtime Foxy. Fitting, since their role in this game is to replace her during the hard mode version of the Funtime Auditorium level. Lolbit's face resembles the Sister Location appearance, but with eyelids and white eyebrows. Their freckles are also black instead of purple. Similar to their face, their body highlights are orange, and their bow tie is purple. For some reason, Lolbit's fingernails are white instead of being painted. Mindy, don't you dare. Hey, no, Mindy, come here. Mindy! Since this is Help Wanted, Lolbit is, of course, all scratched up. I'm gonna say that Scott's original Lolbit model wins. Sure, Steelwool's model has an actual body, but it also has a lot of flaws. Hey, down, Mindy, down. Come on, down. Here. Mindy, down from there. Who'd you knock over? You're knocking for a bendy pop. The white eyebrows look super weird, and the black freckles kind of break up the orange and purple color scheme. And the lack of fingernail paint is really weird. I'm also just not a big fan of the scratched up look this model has. It ruins the smooth look. All of these issues hold the Help Wanted model back. I love Lolbit's original appearance much more, even if this model lacks a full body. The next custom night character I'll be covering is Bonnet, who probably should have been discussed with Freddy and Bonbon, but whatever. Bonnet's appearance during the custom night is simply a color swapped Bonbon. She has a pink body and green eyes. She returned in Ultimate Custom Night as a threat that Dee Dee can summon, and I'm not sure if it's just the lighting, but she looks much brighter here. Like every other character in Help Wanted, she's all scratched up and dented. Similar to Bonbon, her teeth aren't rounded for whatever reason. In Help Wanted 2, her smooth shiny look is back, but she has a much duller color palette, and she's missing her eye highlight. Her teeth still aren't round either. Similar to Funtime Freddy and Bonbon, I think Scott's model is the superior version of Bonnet. The Help Wanted model is much too damaged, and the sequel's appearance looks pretty good, but I'm not the biggest fan of the magenta look that it has. No clue why Steelwool changed that, because Bonnet's pink coloring is much better. Now it's time for the weirdest of them all, 8-Bit Baby. This pixelated version of Circus Baby appears during Sister Location's death minigame. The goal of this is to feed all of the children cupcakes. After doing so, you'll be rewarded with ice cream, which you then naturally have to use to abduct Elizabeth Afton in a depiction of her death at Circus Baby's Pizza World. Lore implications aside, Scott's 8-Bit Baby design is pretty accurate to Circus Baby, but she's missing the plate lines across her body, and her gray spots are only on some of her limbs. Her eyes are also blue rather than green, but this doesn't seem to be a mistake. It's often theorized that Baby's eyes were originally blue, which is backed up by the Plush Babies also having blue eyes. Circus Baby's green eyes are likely a representation of Elizabeth's spirit haunting the animatronic, as she too had green eyes. When Illumix added 8-Bit Baby to special delivery, they changed her eye color to green, possibly to represent that she's hostile. I'd argue that people with blue eyes are scarier, but I don't work at Illumix. Anyways, despite my mixed feelings on special delivery, I absolutely love the random inclusion of 8-Bit Baby. It's really cool to see a minigame character running around as a threat. Her model also looks really good, and her animations are phenomenal. They're so fun, and utilize the pixely cartoonish nature of this character very well. I feel like whoever made these animations had a lot of fun. The only changes I could notice are that the pixels around the fan are a bit smoother, and her right arm is straighter in her idle animations. This model also includes Baby's faceplates, which split open during her jump scare. When she's haywire, her red coloring turns black, and her eyes glow an eerie mimic-looking yellow. The numbers 1578 float around her as a reference to the numbers that Circus Baby will randomly say throughout Sister Location. I think it goes without saying, but Illumix definitely wins here. Their model is not only very accurate, but she has a lot of fun animations that elevate this character from a random inclusion to a really fun depiction of 8-bit baby. Very solid work here from Illumix. Moving on from Sister Location, let's take a look at the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaria Simulator cast. We'll start with the game's marketing mascot, Scrap Baby. This trashy robot is a rebuilt version of Circus Baby after she was ejected from Ennard. Her design is a bit absurd in the best way. She has roller skates and a giant claw for her right hand, which appears to be the same claw that Baby used to abduct children. Scrap Baby's model in Help Wanted 2 is pretty much the same, just with more realistic wear and tear. She has some minor differences, such as her hair having less wires in it, her eyeballs are white, and her legs are less broken. I also noticed the Scrap Baby's upper right arm casing has a ring configuration. The part of her arm that connects to her claw is also missing the ring-like metal. I'm going to say that Steelwool's model is the superior Scrap Baby. Look, I love Scott's, but I don't love how I can count the pixels on it. The withering and damage textures are just straight up pixels. That has always frustrated me, especially because this is an otherwise fantastic model. Luckily, Steelwool's withering doesn't look like it's from Minecraft. It's fantastic and makes this the best Scrap Baby model. Next up is Lefty, one of my favorite characters from this game, partially because he contains the Marionette. This bear is a recolored version of Rockstar Freddy with some minor changes. As the name suggests, he's left-handed and is missing his left eye. Lefty's nose is also bigger than Freddy's, while his star is smaller. And of course, he has a gray and red color palette. Lucky for me, Lefty returned in Help Wanted 2 and looks amazing. As to be expected from Steelwool, his model is all scratched up and dirty, but it works really well here. This damage isn't exaggerated, and the textures look great. I think it also makes much more sense story-wise. Lefty lurks in alleyways and crawls around the dirty vents of the pizza place. It doesn't make sense for him to be in pristine condition. Other than the textures, I noticed that his bow tie and star are much flatter. His missing eye is also done differently. Instead of it just being gone, he has a black, glossy eye. Lefty's remaining eye has a different texture. It lacks any twinkles or big dark spot, and instead has a dark gradient emanating from the pupil. Like previous VR models, his freckles are textures instead of being modeled, and they have dark smudges underneath them. Lefty is also missing his left-handed microphone. The bars connecting his head to his jaw look more like springs, with horizontal lines running through them, and they expand and retract as Lefty moves his mouth. Unlike how on Scott's model, they disconnected from his jaw. Speaking of the mouth, his teeth are a bit dirty, and the lower teeth are crooked. His teeth and eyes also have a yellowish tint. I do think it's worth mentioning that Lefty had a full model made for special delivery that was very accurate to his initial appearance, even with the Cloudspec looking texture. But ultimately, he was never added to the game. And since this is cut content, I don't think it should be compared to these other models that were actually part of the games. Doesn't matter anyways, because the Help Wanted 2 model blows every other Lefty out of the water. Similar to the toys, I don't really like how the Cloudspec texture looks on Lefty. It just feels so odd. Help Wanted 2's dirty textures work really well. They look nice and fit with the animatronic story. His remaining eye is also super creepy, and his missing eye makes much more sense as just a black eyeball. It looks cooler too. Similar to Scrap Baby, I think Steelwool did a great job keeping what made Lefty's design good, while giving him some enhancements. The next bear we'll be looking at is Helpy, a miniature Funtime Freddy, who initially served as a representation of the player in Pizzaria Simulator, before growing to become a major mascot for Fazbear Entertainment and their workforce. In Help Wanted, Helpy appears as an Easter egg and a price counter item. He looks mostly the same, granted he's much lower poly and a little bit desaturated. His eye textures are also more detailed, with blue rays and a wider dark spot on the iris. In Help Wanted 2, his irises are still as detailed as before, but they're shrunken, giving him a traumatized look. The first aid levels have not been kind to him. Speaking of which, those give him a bunch of new model additions to work with the gameplay. You can open his brain, chest, fix his nasty eyes, etc. His body is a smidge dirtier, but nothing too extreme. His cheeks are also much pointier, likely because of optimization lowering their poly count. I also noticed he's a bit more pink instead of magenta. All of these models are pretty good, but I'll hand the win over to Scott Cawthon. Help Wanted 2's tiny eyes and pinkish coloring make Helpy look a tad bit worse than his original appearance, and his low poly count in the first Help Wanted holds him back, leaving the original model standing on top. Now for everyone's favorite Funtime animatronic, Funtime Chica. Honestly, I think she's a tad bit underrated. She's neat, and I was really excited when she returned in Help Wanted 2. In that installment, she looks pretty much the same. She has slight dirty textures to add some realism. The highlight on her right eye is flipped for some reason, and her missing plate has more wires under it. Speaking of which, her lower leg is missing the wire ring around her knee. Overall, this model has fewer visible wires. Moving on to her companion, the Funtime Cupcake's jaw is a bit darker, and he only has 5 bottom teeth. Going upwards, his iris dark spot is much lighter and wider. Something else I noticed is that he's missing his bottom eye highlight, and the twinkle in his left eye is on the wrong side. Similarly, the candle stripes are flipped too, and there's only 2 stripes instead of 3. The original model had a very small one at the top, which is mostly cut off by the candle ending. The flame is also more orange toward the top. These models are very similar, but I'll give the win to Steel Wool, mostly because their Funtime Chica model has some neat, dirty, scratched up textures, which similar to Lefty, aren't too extreme. I'm glad Funtime Chica returned in Help Wanted 2 with a slightly improved model. Now for the most popular, important, and iconic character in the entire FNAF series, Pig Patch. He's one of the mediocre melodies, and this crew strongly resembles the FNAF 1 animatronics, with bright plush appearances, 4 fingers, and thin endoskeletons. Despite Steel Wool doing an amazing job with their Help Wanted 2 models, Pig Patch got treated like he was in the first Help Wanted game. His plush appearance is gone, replaced with a shiny, matted look, and he's desaturated. His belly button is now the same color as his stomach too. He's also missing his battery pack, likely since he has to crawl around, and there's the addition of metal rods in his mouth, similar to Lefty. His ears are much larger, and inside of them lacks any bright pink coloring. His eyes have a lot of differences too. His eyelids are metallic instead of the black ones from Scott's original model. His eyes are much larger, with a slight yellow tint. His pupils are also much smaller. Overall, I think Scott's model is better. Steel Wool's isn't bad, and I think it is scarier, but I feel like it kinda missed the point of him resembling a classic FNAF animatronic. The brighter plush look of Scott's original model was much better. Moving on from the animatronic threats, let's take a look at Candy Cadet, a vendor robot that you can purchase during Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaria simulator, and who appears in Ultimate Custom Night. He gives out candy, and occasionally tells cryptic stories. Candy Cadet returned in Security Breach's Ruin DLC, and Help Wanted 2. Technically, this is a different variant of the character, as he's much more damaged, but we can still see some clear design changes. The most noticeable is that his lights wrap all the way around his head, which is missing the glowing plate on top. His antennae are very different. He still has spheres at the end, albeit they're no longer glowing. Those are connected to his head by rods wrapped in wire, instead of circular rods. I assume those broke off, and these are the Endo antennae. All of his tubing is more rounded, and he's missing the screws on his head and torso. The 3 buttons on his chest are now placed in a rectangular indent, and below that, his dispenser tray appears to be missing. Candy Cadet's arms are no longer connected to the top of his chest. Instead, they're on the side of his torso. One of his hands is also missing, and the remaining one looks different from his original form. It's lacking the glowing part and screw. Instead, it's much more pincher-like, with round finger joints. Going to his base, his wheels are missing the glowing spheres, and there's no crank next to the coin insert. Under that, the price tags are replaced by 3 reddish dots. The lights on the base also don't glow, likely having broken after years of decay. During his animations, his glowing pieces all stay the same color. Instead of how in Pizzaria Simulator and UCN, they'd flash through a variety of colors. While Steel Wool's design is very different and much more worn down, I still say their design is superior. Scott's model is quite good, but it feels somewhat strange, mostly when it comes to the tube material throughout Candy Cadet's body. It's very odd looking. His arms are really awkward with how they stick out, and the Steel Wool hands are much better. I also love how the face lights wrap around Candy Cadet's head. I think it looks much better than them being awkwardly crammed into the center of his face. Overall, this ruined robot has the superior design. But I'm still hoping we can see a fixed Steel Wool Candy Cadet one day for a clear comparison between their model and Scott's. Moving on, I wanted to take a look at the other vendor characters from Pizzaria Simulator that returned in Help Wanted 2, starting with Lemonade Clown. His Steel Wool model is a bit darker, and his eyes are more in line with most of the Help Wanted 2 cast. Lemonade Clown's lower teeth are more spaced, and his flower petals are less rounded. They're more connected and pointed at the tip. The yellow center of the flower looks less like a donut. Instead, it has a large, round indent in the middle. The container/stomach isn't clear, and his stripes are thinner. The buttonholes are also filled in with black coloring. Like most characters in this game, he has a scratched up and desaturated look. The other Juice Fountain character, the Fruit Punch Clown, reuses Lemonade Clown's model, which causes a couple of issues. Their neck is solid instead of a spring. At least they remembered to color it yellow. The clown's arms are also raised instead of how in Pizzaria Simulator they were down. Because of these issues with the Fruit Punch clown, I'd say Scott's models are better. I like the minor changes he gave each clown to make them feel unique. Next up is Gumball Swivel Hands, a cute gumball dispenser who has always reminded me of Chica's Magic Rainbow. In Help Wanted 2, their model looks very similar with the expected VR changes. There's less shine, and the bolts and gumballs on their model are simply textures. Some of their parts are red instead of the colors they had on the original model. Their face is also scratched up and worn, which I think is a neat, realistic touch. However, I'll still give Scott's model the win. I prefer the shiny look, and the gumballs on Steel's model being replaced by a texture holds it back, even though I understand it was likely a necessary change for VR performance. The final group of vendor characters is Trash and the Gang. Two of this group's members appear in Help Wanted 2, those being Bucket Bob and Number 1 Crate. Steel's Bucket Bob looks mostly the same as the original model, just with rougher, more realistic textures. Their gloves also have a slightly different pattern. You might notice that on Scott's model, the back of the glove is missing. However, this doesn't seem to be a modeling mistake. Instead, it looks like it's the result of backface culling, an optimization technique that doesn't render polygons not facing the camera. So the glove is likely fully modeled, just not rendered. Getting to the bottom of Bob, the end of his feet are less rounded. Number 1 Crate appears pretty much the same, but they look more blue and are scratched up. They also have 90 holes on each side of them, instead of the 72 per side on the original model. I think I'll crown Steel as the winners for this group. I like Bucket Bob's realistic textures much more. And Number 1 Crate looks very accurate to Scott's model. I wish we saw more of Trash and the Gang in Help Wanted 2. I really like this weird group of characters, and I would have enjoyed seeing the rest of the gang have a role here. Moving on to Help Wanted, let's start with the main antagonist, Glitchtrap. He made his debut in this VR adventure, and he served as the overarching antagonist for Special Delivery, Security Breach, and Help Wanted 2. This virtual anomaly appears as a costume version of Spring Bonnie, with the addition of a purple vest. You can see stitches and clumps of loose fabric throughout his model. There's also the easy-to-miss inclusion of tears running down his face and spit dripping from his mouth. Later, when Five Nights at Freddy's collaborated with Dead by Daylight, Glitchtrap was added as a legendary skin for the animatronic. There's not too much to discuss with this remodel, as it's very accurate. However, Behaviour did exclude the tears and drool from their model. Maybe they just forgot, or hey, maybe they just found it to be super gross. Who's to say? They also added blood to him to fit more with the game, and he's less shiny. I might just be going crazy from looking at all of these models, but I swear his whiskers are lighter on the Dead by Daylight model. Anyways, despite Steel bringing this iconic character to life, I admittedly think Behaviour's model is much better. The original isn't bad, but the long arms and super thick thighs make Glitchtrap look a bit odd. The Dead by Daylight model doesn't have a major advantage, but I think it looks a bit better, so it wins. Next up is the most frustrating group of characters, the Plush Babies. These Circus Baby plushies appear throughout the Help Wanted games, Security Breach, and are even referenced through the Star Orphans and Secret of the Mimic. The first appearance of a plush Circus Baby is actually an Ultimate Custom Night. However, calling this thing a plush is generous. It is clearly just a shrunken Circus Baby with giant eyes and a filled-in stomach fan. Luckily, in Help Wanted, Steel gave Circus Baby an actual plush model, which was heavily based on Funko's Circus Baby plush. An interesting detail about the Plush Babies is how they have blue eyes, since, as we previously discussed, it's implied that Circus Baby originally had blue eyes. The Plush Babies returned in Security Breach and Help Wanted 2, where they had slightly different textures, glowing eyes, and a flatter stomach fan, but there were no significant changes. Clearly, I'm not declaring Scott the winner, as the Circus Baby plush is incredibly lazy, so Steel's models win. I don't have a strong preference as to which model is better, so Help Wanted 2 Plush Baby, why not? I like her glowing eyes. Moving on to a cooler character, Captain Foxy. This variant of Foxy appeared in Help Wanted's Curse of Dreadbear DLC, and as the name suggests, he's Foxy dressed up as a captain. He has props in Security Breach, but he didn't properly return until the second Help Wanted, where Captain Foxy's fur is cleaner and darker, making him resemble Scott's original Foxy model. However, his highlights are still more of a light tan instead of red. His jacket is much less wrinkly and more blue. The original looks teal to me. Another thing I notice is that his buttons and belt are shinier. However, his eyes lack any rays or twinkles. As Rockstar Foxy would say,
Yar, you win some, you lose some.
Unlike other characters, no other company made a model of Captain Foxy, but I still wanted to compare these two Steel models. We'll do a similar thing later in this video for Security Breach and Five Nights at Candy's. Anyways, despite how much I loved Captain Foxy in Help Wanted, his model in the following game is so much better. The brighter textures in Help Wanted 2 just look really good. Next up is Special Delivery. This game had so many weird animatronic skins, and Behaviour Interactive included some of Springtrap's variants in their Five Nights at Freddy's Dead by Daylight chapter. Starting off with someone who always floats, Clown Springtrap. I was surprised by how similar this guy looks to the original AR model. Overall, he's just the same design with subtle enhancements. Springtrap's left eyelid is still stitched up, but the crack running down it isn't as big. His evil clown grin is much simpler and joyous than the rough smile from Special Delivery. I also noticed that his bow tie is much more pointy. Overall, his clown costume isn't as big, especially the puffed out frills at the end of his sleeves. Those have been slimmed down. More of the pants around his ankles have been torn off, and there's less purple string hanging. Springtrap isn't armed with his giant clown hammer, instead, he has a jigsaw knife. However, it's probably best to use a serrated blade to keep consistency with the other jigsaw victims. Unlike Clown Springtrap, Toxic Springtrap's Dead by Daylight skin is very different. His spreading mutation strands are much brighter, and most of his suit has been broken off, revealing his corpse beneath, which has mutated into a purple lumpy blob that's protruding past the spring locks and endoskeleton. You can see a lot of this on his right leg, as most of the suit has broken away. His lower left leg is falling apart too. A majority of his chest and upper arms are rotted off. You might notice the lack of boils across his suit, which Behaviour seems to have removed in favor of the bright mutation, which has spread across his body. There's also flaps of metal sticking out of this biohazard. One of Springtrap's eyes is glowing purple, while the other is a dull gray. I think both games do a great job bringing these Springtrap variants to life, but Dead by Daylight's models are much better. These obviously have higher quality textures than a mobile game, but they also have a much better design for Toxic Springtrap. I really like how it looks like his suit is being eaten away, and Afton's mutated corpse is really cool. The Dead by Daylight models definitely beat out the Special Delivery ones. The next game to discuss is Security Breach, which doesn't have as many models to compare, but we'll take a look at the few that there are. The cast of this game returns throughout Ruin and Help Wanted 2, with plenty of new variants or model changes to suit the gameplay. But something that many people overlooked is that Glamrock Freddy received some minor visual enhancements in Help Wanted 2. He appears in the cold storage level, which is similar to the repair minigames in the first Help Wanted. Once again, I won't be noting all of his model changes since those pander to the gameplay, but his body receives some slightly new textures. Instead of his smooth look from Security Breach, he has various minor dents and scratches. This was likely added since you're up close and personal in VR. Admittedly, I prefer this more damaged look. It's a bit more detailed and realistic. I always thought his default look is way too clean in Security Breach. Obviously, this change isn't very significant, unlike the next character, Cassie. This brave girl is the protagonist of Security Breach's Ruin DLC, and since the installment has a lot of cutscenes, she has a pretty detailed body model. On the other hand, since you only see her face briefly in the opening cutscene and on grainy security cameras, that part of her model initially appeared to be a slightly altered version of Gregory's face. It doesn't resemble her appearance in the DLC's artwork, and her hair is a bit low quality. However, in Help Wanted 2, Cassie appears in the Help Trap ending with a much better model. Her body appears to be the same, but her face has been remodeled. It's more cartoonish, with a round face and giant eyes. Her hair is also much more detailed. Along with that, she has a darker skin tone to match the artwork from Ruin. Speaking of which, on the PlayStation 5 version of the DLC, her Help Wanted 2 model replaces the original. As for the winning model, I don't really think this is a competition. The Help Wanted 2 Cassie is a massive glow up. I love the cartoonish look, and I appreciate how accurate it is to the Ruin artwork. I'm hoping that when Vanessa and Gregory return, their models are more in line with the style of this one. The final Security Breach character I'll be discussing is the Mex's Entity, who is the digital manifestation of the mechanical X-Form experimental storage computer. The Mex's Entity appears as a dark blue glowing rabbit with pixelated withering throughout their body. They surprisingly returned in Help Wanted 2's Secret of the Mimic update, with some slight differences from their Security Breach Ruin model. Similar to Glamrock Freddy, Mex's changes simply lie in their textures. They're missing their glowing look, and their dirty textures are more visible. It's unknown as to whether this was a mistake or has story implications, but I still thought it was worth mentioning. Obviously, this Security Breach model is taking the win. I'm really confused as to why the Help Wanted 2 model looks so different. The original textures were great. The next group of characters I'll be discussing is the Five Nights at Candy's gang. This fangame series became an official part of Five Nights at Freddy's thanks to the Fazbear fanverse, so I want to take a look at these animatronics. The first game was remastered in 2019, and all of the original characters were given some enhancements. In Five Nights at Candy's Remastered, Candy, Cindy, Chester, and the Penguin all look much brighter, shinier, and higher poly. The big animatronics have slightly rounder hands, and their joints have vertical slits running through them. Blank's joints have horizontal lines running across them, and his lower arm ring is missing. Similar to the previous animatronics, his body is much brighter, which also goes for all of his drawings, making them easier to see. The dirt or veins in Blank's eyes are much darker. His endoskeleton feet have some extra details, such as segmented toes, exposed gears on the side, a plate running down the middle of the feet, and what appears to be bolts sticking out. Old Candy has the same feet and detailed endoskeleton joints, along with the brighter look and improved textures of the previous animatronics. His endoskeleton eyes are noticeably more sunken. The overarching antagonist of the Candy series, the Rat, looks mostly the same in FNAF Remastered. Like everyone else, he has a brighter look, and the metal protruding from his suit looks like bolts rather than metal cubes. Aside from those, the most noticeable change is the addition of wires attached to his endoskeleton. I really like this, since in the Five Nights at Candy's lore, Rat was initially a costume before being turned into a wire-lock animatronic, meaning he was controlled by an employee using the wire system. I really like the inclusion of visible wires. It makes this design lore accurate. Rat's partner in crime, the cat, appears in this game in the form of Shadow Candy. But instead of simply being an Easter egg, he received a whole awesome boss fight. This character has the most changes out of everyone in the game. His textures are now glowing and look rougher. His eyes are also brighter, and his black pupil is smaller. Along with that, Shadow Candy's white glowing iris is much more chaotic. Like classic Candy, his hands are rounder, but a unique feature is that he has claws at the end of his fingers. Possibly because Shadow Candy is an evolved version of the Shadow Cat, who had a much more monstrous appearance. The Five Nights at Candy's remastered models are absolutely the winners here. Similar to the special delivery models and the Help Wanted 2 scraps, these guys simply received minor improvements while keeping what made them so good in the first place. Huge props to Emil Mako for the remastered models, especially Shadow Candy. He looks incredible. As a final bonus category, I want to take a look at the plushies throughout the games. Or I guess you guys want me to. Be sure to vote in polls whenever it's regarding upcoming content. Anyways, Scott Cawthon made plushie models of the Freddy's gang and some other characters, but the only ones with steelable counterparts are the core 4, so we'll be looking at those. In the Help Wanted games and Security Breach, the plushies have a new, more realistic look. Unlike the originals, these are entirely new models. The stuffed animals in the Scott games look like they reused the animatronic heads, with scaled up eyes. On the other hand, Help Wanted's models seem to be based on Funko's toys, which I guess were also based on Scott's models. This inspiration for the Steelwool plushies is very obvious with Chica. Notice how just like the Funko doll, she's missing Mr. Cupcake. She also has the same beak shape and the infamous angry eyebrows. However, the Foxy plush lacks eyebrows, tufts of hair, and he has the addition of a hook. Unlike the Scott or Funko plushies, these guys have multiple poses, either standing or sitting. They also have seams, which I think makes them look a bit more realistic. Foxy received a plushie model in the Dead by Daylight chapter. Similar to the Help Wanted doll, this guy's a little hook, but it's on the left hand instead of the right. Ignoring that, he's also much more realistic than Scott's model, with visible seams and matted fabric. His legs are pretty small, and his face seems to be based on the Sanchi plushie. Compare Foxy's face shape, the fur sticking out on the sides, and his nose. However, unlike the original model, his eye patch is gray, and his remaining eyeball is much flatter, but the eye twinkles are mostly accurate, besides the one over his black pupil. I also noticed that the tufts of hair at the top of his head aren't curved, and they're not all connected. Last, similar to his eye, his teeth are flat, and seem to be made out of some sort of cutout felt or fabric. While I think each of these stuffed animals are great in their own way, the Steelwool models are my favorites. First off, they don't reuse the animatronic heads, which doesn't look bad, but once you notice that, it's hard to unsee. Second, I like how much these look like actual plush dolls. And finally, their designs allow them to have both sitting and standing poses, which is neat. The Dead by Daylight Foxy plush looks a bit too much like a cheap bootleg, but I still like it quite a bit. So yeah, Steelwool's plushies are my favorite. A bonus is that you can throw them around in VR. Now, this is where we say goodbye, unless you want to check out some of our other videos. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at all the changes in the FNAF models over the years. Making this video has given me a greater appreciation for these new models and designs. I'm glad we have so many companies working to bring new Five Nights at Freddy's experiences to life. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and joining our monthly membership. It helps support us, and you'll receive a range of cool perks, including shoutouts in our videos, custom emojis, badges next to your name, exclusive previews of upcoming projects, and more. Special thanks to our current members Shaun and thanks to you for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos.